the general election in December, what was at stake was the future, I believe, and it sounds very stark, but the future of the Jews of Great Britain, because we had, for the first time, palpable fear among those Jewish voters that we might let in a man who was an anti-Semite. He was called an anti-Semite by two chief rabbis, and courageously, Chief Rabbi Mervis, just weeks before the election, stood up and said, in effect, we cannot vote for this man, and therefore we cannot vote for the Labour Party. This was a real first time in British politics.
What did the Labour Party represent beyond the issue of anti-Semitism?
Look, I'm not here to discuss the politics of the Labour Party, their economic policies and everything else. But for the first time, Jews were going to have to vote for a party which they'd voted for generations, as indeed Americans have always almost voted Democrat because that's they believe. We were going to have to vote for a party whose leader was anti-Semitic and who never successfully dealt with the hundreds of cases of anti-Semitic things that were going on inside the Labour Party.
Among the members of Parliament?
The members of Parliament, during the time of the election, hardly ever said anything against what was happening because they wanted Corbyn to get in so they would have a seat. It's amazing how straight after the election they all came out and said anti-Semitism is a disgrace within the Labour Party. Where were they before the election?
Where was the anti-Semitism among the party members who were not necessarily running for Parliament, but running for local, what we call congressional representations?
Well, there were literally hundreds and hundreds of tweets from people who were actually standing for election in local councils, as well as MPs for their Labour Party, who said things, insufferable things about Zionism and Judaism. They had obviously absolute ignorance of the state of Israel, and they said things that would make you recoil. And perhaps the worst thing was that throughout the time coming up to the election, the newspapers portrayed the Conservative leader, Boris Johnson, as basically a smaller Donald Trump. They lumped them together as people who shouldn't be in power. And this, again, was so wrong to do because, of course, it does not reflect the actual process. And that's why, when the Conservatives won, I can remember that moment at 10:30 at night, when the exit polls showed there was going to be a thumping majority of up to 80. We jumped out from our seats and thanked God, because we could have seen a Corbyn government. What would that have meant for the Jewish people? I don't know.
Well, what would it have meant for Britain? In other words, the smoke that belies the fire, the smoke is anti-Semitism, but what does that represent on a national governance and societal basis?
Well, all the things he was saying beforehand. Almost the first day we are elected, we will recognize Palestine. We will stop selling arms or making sure that Israel cannot export any arms, all the things that Corbyn was saying. But the greatest thing was, it wasn't the Jews who voted the Conservatives in, because they're a very small minority. It was the average non-Jewish voter from the northern towns, the towns of northern England which have been deprived for many years compared to London, who realized that this man, Corbyn, was not the man for them. They realized, most of them never having met a Jew, realized that an anti-Semite cannot be in charge of the government. A man who was always pro-Cuba, pro-Venezuela, pro-IRA, the Irish Republican Army, how could he represent us? And it was the northern voter who actually pushed Corbyn out.
Were those northern voters typically conservative voting?
They had never voted in their lives. They were breaking an ironclad rule in their families. We will not vote Tory, we only vote Labour. They swallowed hard and they voted Conservative because they realised what the alternative would have been. And I would say that in the United States of America, people have to do the same thing. They have to swallow hard. Jews have always voted Democrat. But they have to see the writing on the wall, that the Democratic Party today does not represent the Jewish people. It certainly doesn't represent the state of Israel. In any way does it represent what it used to in the past. And I'm very worried that people will just vote Democrat or contribute to Democratic funding when they can see that this is not the way forward anymore, unfortunately.
In the same way that Labor is essentially a pro-socialist, socialistic party and system, do you see the same risk coming in now, mainstream through the Democrats or some of the Democrat leadership?
It does seem to be when you have a leader of the pack in Bernie Sanders. How can he possibly represent the great mass of United States citizens? They don't think like him. How can he possibly beat Donald Trump? Now, everyone will agree that Donald Trump sometimes does not behave the correct way, that he is not, in the Yiddish words, a great mensch. But he has done things, he has kept his promises, and therefore people have to swallow hard, even if they are not Republicans, and I believe vote for him because he is looking after the interests both at home and abroad of the United States, something that Sanders and the others would not do the same thing.